Can you have too much power for your modern crossbow hunting? Are modern crossbows too powerful? That is the question of this week's video here on Death by Bunjie. It is a question posed by a friend of Bunjie. Hey Rich, I think I have something for a new video. Can you have too much power? Maybe. First deer I've shot with the R500. Couple things there. First of all, the R500 and this crossbow, the SWAT X1 from Killer Instinct, two different animals, aren't they? This is 400 feet per second or so, rated right straight from the company. The R500, obviously, 500 feet per second, an ultra modern speed. This is more of a modern speed. And I've been talking recently about how I believe this kind of crossbow setup, for me anyway, this is the perfect crossbow setup. It is something I've toyed with over the years, and now going on 15 seasons hunting with a crossbow, kind of really appreciate this as a perfect crossbow setup. Broken blades, that can be the result of a lot of different things. That's something that's not necessarily associated just with ultra-modern speeds. That's really more of a broadhead question. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this video and in future videos. Done a lot of videos on broadheads. Broadheads are a great topic. They're a perfect topic for us as crossbow hunters. But really what I want to talk about as we go into 2024 as crossbow hunters, I want to talk about too much power. Where are crossbows going? Now, one of the themes of 2023 was stronger, faster, lighter, denser, cheaper. Lighter, faster, stronger, denser, cheaper, whichever order that was. Remember, I read that book last year. When we talk about any sort of technology, crossbows included, we really want to talk about how it improves. And the classes in which it improves are lighter, faster, stronger, denser, cheaper. We want things that are lighter, right? We don't want to carry as heavy a piece of equipment through the woods if we don't have to. Stronger, we want something that lasts longer, that sort of thing. Faster, speed is something that's relevant with crossbows, and we're seeing incredible increases in speed. I suspect we might even see some increases in speed this year in 2024 as we look at new crossbows in upcoming videos. Denser was another one of those categories that the book talked about, that improvements in technology give us. Something that's denser is something that's more feature rich, right? New things like cranks for people that don't want to rope cock their crossbows. And for me, denser, another feature I would like would maybe is quieter, right? That's something we would look at with new crossbows. And cheaper. Man, holy cow, look at the OB, the original Bunjie, hanging on the wall behind me here in the trophy room in the kingdom of Bunjie. That crossbow I bought in 2010. It's an Excalibur Axiom. By today's standards, that is a very big old slow crossbow, but it's the OB. Without that crossbow, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I wouldn't be so fascinated with crossbow hunting if it weren't for that crossbow. Modern crossbows like this one, and there are many options on the market. This is not the only one. But for me, this achieves exactly that. It is crossbow perfection. So back to the question, can you have too much power with modern crossbows? The SWAT X1 shooting 400 feet per second or so, manufacturer's specs with the manufacturer's arrow, that kind of stuff. It's a lot slower than that with the arrows I use. I use a 500 grain arrow setup, total arrow weight on that crossbow, and I love it. It is my crossbow perfection. But can you have too much power if you step up to 450, 460, 500 feet per second or more? I wrote about this in my book, The Death by Bunjie Crossbow Method. Once you change one thing, you change something else, and you have to take all of that into account. Can you have too much power? I think the short answer is yes. At least today, you can have too much power in these crossbows. I also wrote about this in my book, The Rule of 400. If you're shooting a crossbow at 400 feet per second and shooting a 400 or so grain arrow, then you achieve in the 0.7 slugs of momentum range. That's pretty cool. 140 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. When I started, 70 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, right? 0.4 slugs with that old slow crossbow shooting a 350 grain arrow, 305 feet per second, right out of the box. That's not much by today's modern standards, right? That's compound bow hunter standards, right? That's not what we as crossbow hunters are looking for. That's not what we as crossbow hunters deserve. Modern crossbow, 400 feet per second, about 400 grain arrow or so. If you're shooting around those numbers, you're probably shooting about 140 foot-pounds of kinetic energy and 0.7 slugs of momentum. That's the kind of energy that's perfect, that gets the job done on white-tailed deer, most anything in North America. But it also doesn't blow through all the modern crossbow targets. It also doesn't require to use special field points. It also doesn't mean that you can't sight your crossbow in and take a shot at 20 yards. You have to move the target out to 40 so it doesn't go clean through the target. It also means you don't have to worry about broadheads opening prematurely necessarily, right? Most modern broadheads are tested on these 400 feet per second crossbows because there's so many of them. They all kind of shoot that speed. If you move up to the higher speeds, 500 feet per second or so, yeah, now you got to worry about targets, you got to worry about broadheads, and a lot of different questions start to arise. So can you have a little bit too much power? Maybe so. And when we talk about power, 450s, 500 feet per second, out of the box, these crossbows are shooting 400 grain arrows, not 350 like the old Excalibur there, but a 400 grain arrow or more at those high speeds. You end up with 0.8, 0.9, maybe even a full slug of momentum at launch. That's an awful lot to ask of these modern targets, right?
That's a kinetic 650, should stop everything.
The nice thing about the power is you don't have to worry about penetration anymore. For years as a crossbow hunter, I talked about penetration and trying to resolve penetration issues. You know, you're aiming at the Bunjie triangle or the vital V on those deer, and if you make a proper shot to the ribs and the arrow doesn't really hit anything that's too stiff, like a shoulder blade or anything like that, or the meat in the shoulder, for the most part, the arrows would pass through just fine. Here's the problem, however. The minute you move forward and try and get in the front of the deer's vitals where all the primary arteries are and the best blood trails are and the front of the lungs and the heart and all that stuff is, now you're encountering bone from the legs, you're encountering the shoulder blade perhaps, and you're encountering the meat from the shoulder of those animals. And the bigger those animals get, the harder it is to get penetration.
You sure like breaking proflights, don't you?
It's nothing personal with the proflights. It's the deer. Let's blame it on him. In my experience, if you're in that 0.7 slugs of momentum category, you don't have to worry about that penetration anymore. All of a sudden now, this is one of the things that's changed over the years for us as crossbow hunters. That arrow is going to go through those animals. That is crossbow perfection. Now, I beefed up the arrow weight a little bit, kind of by accident with the SWAT X1. The arrows I'm shooting are the Dragon Claws, and it just worked out to be around 500 grains, the total arrow weight. I added the Luminox to the back end. I've got the 150 grain Swahacker, which is the bigger cutting diameter. I like that. So I've got that on the front end of the arrow, and the overall weight turned out to be around 500 grains. To me, 450 grains is really a perfect weight, hunting weight for a crossbow, for modern crossbows. Anything in the 400s I think is fine. Personally, that's what I think. For most crossbows, but it's going to vary from one to another. If you got limb concerns, you might want to go closer to the 500 or what have you. Genevieve's crossbow, Bunjie Jr., we've upped that to over 500 grains, trying to slow the crossbow down even more to put a little less stress on those limbs. But being in the 0.7 slugs of momentum category, that's really nice in the whitetail woods. This year with the SWAT X1, I was fortunate enough to take not one, but 2 bucks. Can you believe that? 2 really nice bucks, one in Maryland and one in Pennsylvania. Both of those deer, pretty good sized bodies, and the arrows passed through with ease, but they didn't go sailing off into the distance so I couldn't find them. They didn't bury 1.5 feet into the ground. They passed through the animal and were left very close to the point of impact. The scene of the crime.
Look at that.
Very easy to find my arrow, pick it up and examine it, and get all that evidence I need before I decide to track that deer. That is crossbow perfection. And that's one of the problems with the ultra-modern crossbows now, isn't it? If you're shooting 500 feet per second, now all of a sudden there's leftover energy. Your broadhead and the impact of the arrow on the animal didn't eat up all of that energy and just leave the arrow laying on the other side of the animal as it runs away. Instead, the arrow goes singing on through the woods. It might be damaged from hitting something, or it will have buried itself so far into the dirt. You've wasted a lot of energy on dirt or on rocks or trees or what have you. That's wasted energy. The only purpose of putting energy into that arrow is to kill the animal, to do damage to the animal, to bring that animal down quickly. Any energy that you put into that arrow beyond that is a waste. It's more than is necessary. If there were a way to capture all of that 500 feet per second energy, that 1 slug of momentum, the extra 0.3 slugs of momentum, right beyond the 0.7. If there's a way to capture that and put that in the animal, put that into damage in the animal with a bigger broadhead, right? A giant broadhead maybe, then it might not be a waste. But if that energy just gets put into the dirt or something else, it just goes off in the air, that's a waste. Hard on targets, hard on finding arrows, you name it. The gear hasn't caught up to that yet.
That's insane. Does Swahacker make a 4 or 5 inch?
That's what you need, right? I wouldn't shoot swaggers out of this.
No.
You got to shoot a tripan.
Suck up all that energy, yeah.
Shooting the big,
Yeah.
SWAT melee.
Bigger the better. But here's the flip side. Here's the other thing. And that is that extra speed, that extra 100 feet per second, that's awesome. I really like the extra speed. The more speed, the better. The faster my arrow gets to that target, gets to that animal, the better. Period. There's no question about that. And this comes from a guy who for more than a decade hunted exclusively with a 305 feet per second crossbow. And for the last few years of that, to get more penetration, to get more energy, was slowing that crossbow down with heavier arrows, shooting 563 grains currently out of that crossbow. The problem with that is you've slowed it down so much that even modern compound bows are kind of faster than that. Even at 20 yards, right? I shot a doe this year at 22 yards, for example. She had her head up, and that deer still drops 3 or 4 inches before the arrow gets there. At 22 yards. That's just too slow. That's too slow. It's 2024 now. You don't hunt with stuff that's that slow in this day and age. That's ridiculous, right? We're crossbow hunters. We're crossbow hunters. We deserve better than that, right? Modern crossbows, right? Like the Deathstalker from Scorpion, Bunjie 3.0, the slick black Cadillac. Feels nice to pick this crossbow up. I really do like this crossbow. Years ago, when I was hunting with this crossbow, out of that same stand, 20 yards, I put an arrow through that deer and into the dirt before she had a chance to duck. Shooting similar modern speeds with the SWAT X1, the Enforcer. Using this crossbow this year, 30 yards or so, no ducking on a deer at 30 yards. That's a modern speed. And I can tell you, with Bunjie 3.0, years ago I had the same experience. Shooting at 30 yards, no dropping on that deer at 30 yards. So that's kind of where I'm at. For today's purposes, right, we're heading into 2024. By the time you see this video, it will be 2024. I'm making the video on New Year's Eve of 2023. So that's when I'm actually recording this. But I can tell you, as we go into the new year, we're looking for lighter, faster, stronger, denser, cheaper. We'll look at new crossbows. We'll continue to evaluate the ones that I'm using and the ones that you're using. But this is the problem that we have right now heading into the future of crossbows. How do we get that extra speed, right, so that we can reach out and not worry about deer ducking the string? How do we get that extra speed, maybe 500 feet per second, but not have all the leftover wasted energy? Still have targets that will stop our arrows. Still have broadheads that won't open prematurely, won't be destroyed upon impact. These are the questions that we have, right? So we have to look for lighter, stronger, faster, denser, cheaper broadheads and targets. We'll be looking at crossbow equipment in the future here on Death by Bunjie, and I hope you will join us. Until next time, all hail Bunjie.